When we are looking at how a unit can develop and increase their stats, there is one aspect of a unit that will always come to mind first, and that is their growth rates. This can sometimes seem like the be-all and end-all. The unit with better growths will grow better than a unit with worse growths, right? Well, yes, but also no. Today we will talk about the other important and often overlooked factors that can impact a unit's growth. Welcome to a Fire Emblem talk, where I take a dive into a Fire Emblem mechanic, concept, or topic, and we can go down the rabbit hole together. Before we start, I would like to sincerely thank the people who back the channel on Patreon, where for just £1 a month, you can support the channel financially. For more information, check the link in the description. Now, just to clarify, this isn't going to be some grand reveal that growth rates are a conspiracy and a 30% growth is actually better than a 40% growth because of unknown mathematical nonsense going on in the back end. No, that is not the case, and in a vacuum, yes. If you gave Unit A with a 50% strength growth 10 levels, and you gave Unit B with a 40% strength growth 10 levels, Unit A will gain, on average, 1 point of strength more than Unit B. What we are going to look into here are the other important factors that affect a unit's growth. The core of this comes down to the fact that in order to take advantage of growth rates, a unit has to gain levels, and as a result, gain EXP. And whilst having good growth rates will help a unit grow effectively, it is just as important for a unit's growth that they are able to easily and consistently gain experience, otherwise those growths will never play much of a role. Base stats are the most obvious place to start here. There is the most notable side to this, which is that having lower bases mean that your growths for a period of time are just compensating for those lower bases. The most blatant example of this are Bartray and Dorcas, a pair of fighters from Fire Emblem the Blazing Blade. Bartray has a 20% higher speed growth than Dorcas, which sounds impressive, however Dorcas starts with 3 more base speed. This means that on average it would take 15 levels for this speed difference to balance out if they both leveled evenly. Quite a substantial time for Dorcas to hold the lead. The ultimate consequence of this is that if a unit's starting point is too poor, they could grow excellently and still just end up being mediocre because they have to spend so much time catching up and getting to a point that's acceptable first. Whilst growth is important to reach a unit's peak, they need a strong foundation to build from. However, base stats also play another important role in a unit's growth, as they are vital to a unit gaining EXP, as having solid bases allows the unit to secure kills and the large amount of EXP they contain much more easily than a unit that doesn't. Some stats are obviously much more relevant here, such as strength and especially speed, as early doubling potential can skyrocket a unit up the levels. This sounds obvious, but it seems to sometimes be overlooked as to how this can actually hinder a growth unit's, well, growth. To return to the Bartray and Dorcas example, whilst it will absolutely take Bartray a long time to overtake Dorcas, you also can't overlook that during this period where Dorcas will have the lead, he will also have a much easier time doubling enemies, and thus getting EXP from killing them. So not only will Bartray need a ton of levels to match Dorcas' speed, but Dorcas will also have an easier time gaining that EXP, and as a result will likely be gaining it at a faster rate. By the time Bartray has gained the 15 levels alongside Dorcas to match his base speed, Dorcas might actually have gained more than 15 levels. He might have gained 20 and thus still have that lead, because he was ahead for so long and had a much easier time getting experience. Of course, you can also look at somebody like Amelia from Fire Emblem the Sacred Stones, who ticks a lot of the boxes we will go into later in this video and has a lot going in her favour as a growth unit, but she joins so far behind as a level 1 trainee in Chapter 9 that getting her any sort of natural EXP is going to be hugely inconvenient and require a ton of babying. Base stats also help to contribute to another important aspect of a growth unit, which is their recoverability, or their grace period for bad level ups. In most instances, the stats you gain on level up are random, with growth rates dictating how likely you are to gain any specific stat. Whilst we can assume how a unit is likely to grow on average, there will always be outliers to this. If a unit is able to still perform well with a couple of undesirable level ups, it can massively help them to bounce back and give the averages a chance to even back out. For example, if a unit levels from level 1 to level 3 and fails to gain either strength or speed, a unit who can recover well might still be able to contribute on their own merits for the next couple of chapters, to allow them to gain more levels to gain that strength and speed that they need. However, a unit with poor recoverability would be one who needs those growths immediately to be able to perform on the next chapter. An example of a unit this can really affect is Ford from Fire Emblem 8. Ford has a 40% strength growth. You first get to use him on Chapter 5X, and he returns on Chapter 8. If his growths on 5X grant him a point of strength, the amount of enemies he can kill on Chapter 8 can greatly increase, as many of them fall somewhere exactly within that kill range. Of course, the exact number is hard to pin down because GBA enemies have variable stats. The enemy soldiers have between 26 and 30 HP on Chapter 8, and between 0 and 2 defense, wielding heavy steel lances with mediocre speed stats, making them easy doubles for almost any unit. Ford outputs 14 damage with an Iron Lance at base. This means that if a soldier rolls 26 HP and 2 defense, he won't kill them at base. If he gains a point of strength, however, he will. There are a lot of permutations where his kill potential on the immediate map after he joins can be greatly altered by those very first growths. Contrast this with Kyle, who has 2 points more of strength. If neither gain strength on their first couple of levels, Kyle will find it much easier to catch back up, as he can secure kills more consistently even with a couple of poor early level ups, helping him to maintain his EXP growth. Ford would be an example of a unit who has a very small grace period and quite poor recoverability from bad level ups. Whilst most of the time he should turn out quite well, a single bad level early on can make him quite hard to redeem, so if he doesn't hit the ground running, catching him back up can end up being quite the chore. This is just an example, and of course there are other steps you can take to catch a unit back up, such as offsetting a poor strength growth with a higher damage weapon to help them out. These do usually come with downsides in other areas though, such as the higher weapon weight making it harder to double, or the higher might weapon being more expensive or a limited resource, which now has to be distributed to an underperforming unit just to help them catch up, or they may be unable to kill with a more flexible weapon option such as a javelin or a hand axe, so whilst a poor grace period might not always write a unit off completely, it can negatively impact your team in other ways. A unit's base class can also play a massive role here, particularly in relation to the class's movement. Being able to move more gives you the opportunity to participate in more combat, and as a result have more opportunities to gain EXP. Not only do you reach the combat faster, but you can also likely be more flexible with both your positioning to set you up for more combat on future turns, as well as your enemy selection to pick a target you can kill rather than chip, or without taking counterattack damage. Weapon availability can also be a factor for similar reasons, particularly in enemy phase focused games, where 1-2 range options such as javelins and hand axes can be crucial. A great example of a unit who suffers from these problems is actually the avatar of Fire Emblem Engage, Aaliyah. While she has perfect availability and is locked to Marth in the early chapters, to gain the valuable SP alongside XP, their 4 move combined with their limitation to mostly 1 range means that other units will just see far more opportunities to enter combat and secure kills, either from their allies having higher move, higher range, or both. Of course, Aaliyah isn't the only example of this, with a lot of sword-locked, foot-locked units being easy targets for this criticism, such as Joshua, Eliwood, or FE9 Mia. Being low movement and range locked has a lot of combat implications and overall negative effects for a unit's performance, but I think it can sometimes be overlooked how quickly a unit can fall behind if they just can't keep up with the action. Obviously, the main game to look at for this would be something like Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, where the volume of mounted units along with the effectiveness of roads mean they can often sweep up all the enemies before your infantry even arrive. Before we wrap up, I'll touch on a couple of the more obvious outlying factors affecting units whose growths are pretty obviously not to be taken at face value, just for the sake of completion. Starting with, well, how much EXP a unit actually gets. I'm sure the example of this that is very fresh in everybody's mind will be Fire Emblem Engage's Vanda, who gains around 1 EXP per combat for a lot of the game. That being said, this can be applied to almost any Jagan in the series, or a unit with high internal levels. I feel like this is common knowledge. Seth and Titania aren't exactly growth units, but they are units with great growths who can't take the same advantage of them as some other units, despite meeting the rest of the criteria here of having cracked bases, high move, 1-2 range, etc., simply because it takes them so long to grow a single level. That being said, a unit like Seth's outstanding growths can be a reason to feed him boss kills, which are guaranteed to give a high amount of EXP, and these units can often pick up so many kills just due to their raw combat prowess that they can actually grow pretty reasonably anyway. Of course, this factor can also be inverted. A unit like Ross will gain significantly more EXP than many others because of him starting at level 1 in his trainee class. Whilst his bases are poor, he gains EXP extremely quickly, even just from simple chip damage, which can allow him to catch up in quite a timely manner. Speaking of Ross, how much room a unit has to grow and the time they have to grow it is an important factor. For example, FE6's Corel has absolutely absurd growths, with at least 100% in every stat, meaning he is guaranteed to gain at least one of all of these on each level up, potentially 2, and is guaranteed 2 to 3 HP. The catch is, he joins as a level 19 Swordmaster, meaning he can only grow a single level at all. This is obviously an extreme example, but in general this is something to take into account, especially when considering a more grounded example like Ross compared to Garcia, as they have fairly comparable growth rates, but Ross can gain 12 more potential levels, giving him more opportunity to capitalise off of this. Of course, this comes at the cost of other areas such as lower bases. In comparison to a unit like FE7's Nino, Ross also joins with plenty of time left to grow, since he joins on just Chapter 2. Still very early on in the game with plenty of time, maps, and EXP opportunities ahead of him. Obviously, these last couple of issues are more obvious limiters, but I felt it was worth throwing them out there anyway. In conclusion, growth rates are absolutely an important part of a unit's development, but I think they are commonly viewed as the only factor in how much a unit can improve, but in reality there is a lot more in play, mainly how easily a unit can actually grow. A 50% growth is better than a 40% growth on paper, but if the first unit can only grow 10 levels in the time the latter can grow 15, the latter will more likely come out on top. It's important to take both into account when considering the units who you want to invest into for the long term. That's going to be all for today. If you would like to input your own thoughts onto this topic, feel free to leave a comment below. Alternatively, join the Discord, where you can discuss this video, my other content, or Fire Emblem in general. Finally, I would once again like to thank the people who back the channel on Patreon, where for just £1 a month, you can support the channel financially, as well as get access to a bunch of benefits. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.